Don, can you pull your folks up? And so while Don and his panel are assembling up here, let me do a brief introduction. Don, do you want to introduce your panel members, or do you want me to do that? Oh, well, you'll take care of it. Okay. Let me just ask you all this. Anybody in this room not taken any type of avalanche education from Don Sharaf over the years? All right, there's a few of you that haven't. So Don was part of the crew who bought AAI from Rod Newcomb many years ago. He's entering his third decade of working in the avalanche path. He's been working for Dave Hammering and Associates, but he's done pretty much everything else under the sun in terms of avalanche operations and education. So there you go.
All right, Patrick, I think we have one slide. It's, I'm definitely not going to overload you with PowerPoint. There it is. All right, title of our presentation. First off, I'd like to thank these folks that came out. You've gotten to know Wren a little bit through her talk with Sydney, and then certainly Simon, who just presented. Next to Wren is Don Lawless. There we go. Who is the Avalanche Program Supervisor for the Wyoming Department of Transportation. He's also a project engineer. So it'll be great getting his perspective. Then next to Don is Allison Bergh, who's one of the co-owner of Leadership at Play, which does a bunch of work with different agencies and outfits on decision-making, developing judgment, and kind of laterally worker safety. But I'm going to go back through and say why I picked these people to be on stage with me. So Allison, her list of clients span many different realms, from high-risk, low-consequence operations to as low as reasonably possible risk with massively high consequences. And if you think of the NASA space program, that'll kind of clarify that statement for you. Don has provided a perspective on how to keep, or will provide a perspective on how to keep a highly trained and highly experienced team as safe as reasonably possible, while also overseeing a team that is far less trained, but has even greater exposure than the Avalanche program staff. So if you think of your plow drivers driving through the night under loading avalanche paths, that's what I'm referring to. Wren has addressed avalanche worker safety directly in many different realms, including hazard reduction at a ski area, helicopter and field operations with industry and highways, which you will hear more about tomorrow, and when teaching upcoming and aspiring avalanche professionals through the CAA and Selkirk College. And then Simon, as you just heard, has been an integral part of the evolution of the National Avalanche, or USFS Avalanche Centers. And he has, I've seen different numbers now, 15, 21, or 22 Avalanche Centers somewhat under his thumb. And, you know, if you figure out 5 forecasters and observers going out every day for those operations, you're looking at 105, give or take, people in avalanche terrain on a daily basis. So that's a lot of people to try and give systems and advice to try and keep them so they can come back at the end of the day. So that's why they're here. I'm very grateful for that. Okay, so worker safety. See if I can press the right button here. I'm not, or haven't been, a huge fan of word clouds, but here's one. So there's a lot that can be said about worker safety, and in fact, the biggest challenge for this panel was what not to ask, because we could spend days and days on it. I think all these different things came to my mind thinking about worker safety, but I think Allison this morning hit on a really good one that I missed, and that was humility. So as we're talking about different questions, think about how these different words may play into that reality. Also, following this talk, think about what words you can add to your lexicon for worker safety. So as I was trying to put this together, I was trying to come up with a simple analogy. This is a bit of a stretch, but I have one for the Teton counties. Now, would you prefer the freedom and adventure that you get going out on an elk hunt or a cattle drive? Western motif, right? Or are you more of a person who prefers the organization and reliability found in an airplane pilot's cockpit or cabin? So there's a bunch of different approaches to a starting goal and an end state. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of explore that paradigm that explores the difference between the wild, wild west and a very structured, detailed program. So let's see where this discussion takes us. Okay. Don, I'm going to start off addressing this question to you, but as with all these questions, as other thoughts come up amongst the crowd, please, or amongst this panel, please chime in. So, protocols and rules often contribute to safer worker environments. How do we counteract impulsive decisions and personal desires without losing the benefits of flexibility and improvisation?
So I have about 3 hours for this question. I have about that much time worth of thoughts on it, so I'll try to bring it down in about 5 minutes. So that really touches on the subject of employees and how you develop them. One, you have to start with training them. You bring somebody in who doesn't have any experience, they don't have any education. You've got to start with training. You've got to train in good habits right from the beginning. And as they gain experience, you need to have, to speak with them. You need to have feedback. You need to hear what their thoughts are and how you can to help them to think the right way. In the construction world, there's a thing called a capable person. It seems like a really low bar, to be capable. That's it. You're just capable of doing the job. But a capable person is somebody who you can bring into a specialized situation and they can take a look at it and they can say, hey, this is what you guys need to do. This is the way that it needs to be done the right way. And looking at the difference from somebody coming in on day one and somebody who is determined as a capable person, it's a process to get to that point. I always think about in the avalanche world, there's been numerous presentations and they talk about it's a graph, and on the y-axis it's what people think they know about avalanches, and on the x-axis it's how many years of experience they have in avalanche terrain. And I think it's like 2 or 3 years is where they max out of how much knowledge they think they have, and then after that it drops way down and then slowly comes up, but it never gets to as high as they think they are. And so the crux of this whole thing is trying to take the people who have those 2 years experience, who think they know everything that they've got, and kind of bringing them back down gently, and keeping barriers on people of what type of decision making they can make until they develop the experience is super important. You know, I always think about understanding as as education and experience put together. You know, you can have a lot of really good education, but without experience, you still don't have a really good understanding. And so it takes both of those things, and it takes years to develop that type of knowledge base. And you know, to bring in some things that Wren said earlier, you can have that knowledge, you can have that really good understanding of things, but you might be going into the yellow zone or the orange zone, and the really highly capable person can understand when they're going into that area and say that they need to put some of those barriers back on themselves, because they're not in a good mindset to be making those type of decisions. So that's my 4-minute response.
All right, so that sounds like it hinges on knowing your team, having a small enough team that you can make that judgment of, you know, where they are in their progression and how rigidly you ask them to follow protocols versus making in-field decisions. Anyone else want to comment or give perspective on how do you make that judgment call? How do you make that assessment?
I could add a little bit. One of the things, you know, we talk about with worker safety, we had an accident in the late 90s where 2 Ministry of Highway avalanche technicians were skiing, you know, something they had skied before, but they both were killed in that accident. And it was certainly a watershed moment in our industry in British Columbia with our WorkSafe BC. And I bring it up in our training, you know, that I feel we're really lucky in what we get to do. And I just did a bunch of job interviews, and I talk about this in the job interview. You know, if you're coming, how are you going to be in a storm cycle and we're driving a truck and you're not out skiing POW? But it's that ability to make those decisions but understand the bigger picture. You know, so we talk about our risk tolerances in terms of personal, professional. And so I think getting that culture and getting that buy-in so that you're empowering people to make a good decision about I guess getting the buy-in for their own safety. So in terms of like rules and protocols, I'm not, you know, you don't want to be like, yes, we do need rules and protocols, but if I can get you to think that like, hey, this is probably a good idea for the longevity of not just us, but our program. You know, so I'll talk about like, well, the fact if we go out and make a mistake, it's not just us or our families, it's the other 8 programs in the province. We could shut down the fact that I can call up a helicopter anytime I want. I can go dig snow profiles. And I can go wherever I want. Nobody's checking on me. And I'm given that responsibility, so I don't ever want to, you know, mess that up. Anyway.
All right, so as well as incorporating systems and flexibility, you're also introducing accountability is what I'm hearing. Okay, great. Allison, forgive me if I misquote this, but on the stage, I believe, a few years back, Margaret from Sun Valley said, culture eats training for breakfast, which is a rephrase from someone else who said it before. But culture is a very strong part of our work environments. So culture versus systems, how do you build a safety culture, and which do you prioritize, culture or systems?
Is this on? Great. I've always wanted to come up here. I see a lot of music in here, and now I know what it's like to be a musician. Like the lights, it's just a different experience up on this stage. I have had the pleasure of working with a bunch of NASA folks, and that is what Don was referencing. When I was a NOLS instructor, I had the opportunity to go on 2 different field courses with NASA astronaut crews. Those folks are cool, they're really smart, and they're really humble. And through that relationship, through working those couple courses, I ended up in Houston working with the Flight Operations Directorate, which is think of all the people who are the chiefs of all the things that make space flight happen. Mission control, chief of the astronaut office, chief of the International Space Station, all those folks. I talked to one of those guys on the phone the other day. I brought him these questions and said, hey, do you have a few minutes to chat? And he said the same thing. He said, culture is king, and not in lieu of systems, but that is always going to win out. And in my experience from working with a lot of Forest Service organizations, with a bunch of ski patrols, mostly in the Vail Resorts group, and NASA, I would say, were the groups of the organizations I work with that are most risk, sort of live in the risk world. Certainly all the fire folks in the Forest Service and you all. That is my experience. And systems are hugely important. Policies are hugely important. Checklists are hugely important. And they're only as good as the team of people that use them. And so when I think about the word culture, I think of norms of behavior. That is how we define it. And so what are the behaviors that the team uses around those checklists, policies, procedures? In talking to Stephen, he's actually moved up in NASA. Turns out he's the deputy director, so he's second in command at Johnson Space Center. It was pretty awesome talking to him from my living room the other day. And he goes on to talk about what he thinks one of his main jobs around culture is modeling humility and modeling exceptional leadership around what does he want to see his team members do in terms of asking questions. I mean, learning from the Challenger and Columbia disasters, information wasn't brought up the chain, people didn't ask for help, and he feels like his job is to model humility so that that culture is embedded in what they do.
Great.
Allison, it kind of sounds like you cheated a little bit on your phone a friend on this question. The only other thoughts I had about this is if you have a good culture, then the policies and all that other stuff falls into place, because the people who you want to have buy-in for these things are the ones that are going to come up with the policies. And so that's why I agree with either you or your friend, whoever came up with the answer, that the culture is for sure the most important thing.
And we would both absolutely say that it's a both and, 100%. And he said that very specifically, and I have seen that in my work. And in fact, I benefited from it just the other day. I ended up at urgent care with some symptoms that one of my dear friends in this room was like, you should go get seen. And I was really glad that there are checklists and systems in place to take care of my personal health. So I'm all for those. And I guess I've just, I have seen enough. I was a ski patroller. I patrolled here at the village for a couple winters, and just that experience, teams I've been part of, the environment that's created where you feel comfortable challenging the checklist, challenging the policy, the procedure in the moment. Are you comfortable speaking truth to power? Just it's an important part of making good decisions.
All right, going a little bit off script. And this is kind of a puck drop for the entire team here as far as who takes it. Or how long do you think it takes to change a culture within an organization, and what factors play into that?
Simon?
I think it really depends on what it is you're trying to change. And are we talking about a culture that's a small team, or are you talking about a culture that's like nationwide diverse teams? And of course, go ahead.
So back to scale again.
Back to scale, a broken record. Of course, I think that like with small teams, you both have the opportunity to make really rapid change, but you also have the opportunity to create rapid destruction. So like small teams can be moved and encouraged and engaged and brought forward very quickly. But if you lose your relationship with one of those people, the whole thing can come undone. And a good friend of mine is the, I think his title is Commandant of the Naval Air Station in Whidbey Island. And this guy is like the responsibility this guy has is profound. But he also has, at this point, an incredible amount of experience with teams and with risk and with worker safety and a variety of other things. But he told me one time, he's like, man, small teams are easy. I was like, what do you mean they're easy? Like, what if you get a bad apple, or what if you're the bad apple? And he's like, well, you just have to make the change. I'm like, So we talked about that for a while, and basically his whole shtick is like, big teams are hard because it's hard to put a finger on how long it's going to take to change widespread national culture. Like, there's so many moving parts. Small teams, you can get it done, but if something goes wrong and if the relationships break down in that team, you have to make the change and you have to remove whatever that barrier is, which generally removing a person, which as we all know, that's really hard to do for a variety of reasons, either personal or professional or institutional. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It gets there. Yeah, I think part of it also is the starting point, and then also the achieving buy-in through, and that's, again, back to scale. Great, thanks. All right, simple question, Wren. Checklists, love them or hate them?
None of your questions are simple. And there's lots of thoughts that come up, but both, I guess. And in my experience, checklists are important to provide structure. And sorry, I'm looking at a couple notes because I've got a lot of different thoughts going on in my head right now. They can help when you've got a lot going on, when you're in a really rapid, dynamic environment, so that you're not missing key points. And that can help when you're in a really heavily overloaded, like you've got a lot of data coming in from a lot of different sources, or when you have a lack of data, like you're remote forecasting for an area. So having a checklist to follow can be helpful with that. But I've also seen them be able to be really restrictive. When I went up to Camano, I went from a ski hill, a small ski hill, medium-sized ski hill, and into this heavy industrial scene that I was, very foreign to me. And we had to chalk our wheels on flat pavement, and you couldn't have a ladder on site. And I had to put my safety glasses and high-vis vest on to walk across the dirt road to go to the bathroom. And so that I felt like was very restrictive and hard to get the buy-in. A lot of those rules were made for the lowest common denominator because at some point somebody's truck had rolled back and squished them somewhere along the line. And so everybody had to chalk their wheels. So you can lose the buy-in on that and people start to disregard them, so that then when you do have important safety rules or checklists to follow, people wouldn't do it because they're like, it doesn't matter. But I'll try to wrap it up here quick. But one of the places where I really fought for it and I feel like won was in our heli bombing procedures. So in that situation, high pressure industrial, like production industry, to shut down the road, to do the heli bombing, I'd be texting, phoning, radio, communicating, making sure sweeps were done, making sure it was safe to secure the blast area. And one of the things we had was like our pre-flight briefing with the pilot. And I talked about that, that was our sacred space. And even if we were doing consecutive days where we were doing multiple heli bombing missions, every single day we would do that pre-flight briefing and we would go through our checklist. So we would talk about our mislight and our misfire procedures, and we would talk about how we approached bad weather flying. And it wasn't that we didn't know how to do that. We did hundreds and hundreds of bombing runs, but it gave a structure to stop. And for me, it allowed me to take a deep breath and make sure I wasn't missing anything. And even just reviewing the commands of how we did that avalanche control. And we really stuck to that. And I was able to go back to this large international mining company based out of Australia that knew nothing about avalanches, but I was able to tie that in to worker safety. And this is a very risky business that we're doing, and able to maintain that. And even if it was 10 minutes, it gave our team a chance to kind of come back. So love them, hate them, have seen kind of both sides of them, but have also brought that into my current role. We did have couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, with the ministry, we had a helicopter crash where 2 technicians were bombing, and pilot lost reference, tail rotor strike, and the helicopter flipped over. And, you know, we've looked at our safety procedures and protocols, and we are tightening up those checklists and those procedures, and so that we're more uniform and more in line across our programs, at least.
I had some experience along with the carpenters when running AI, constructing a backcountry ski avalanche safety checklist, and it was an amazingly involved, long process. Have any of you designed a checklist, and what was your experience there?
Yeah, so with our howitzer program, we have a series of checklists that we go through. It's an Army program, and it's, you know, you don't put your left foot in front of your right foot until you check that your right foot goes after your left foot. You know, it's, you walk around the whole thing, and we develop our own checklist that then goes back up to the Army, and they check your checklist and make sure it's everything that they want checked. And every time you get a different trainer that comes in to train you on it, they have different things that they want on your checklist as well. So we just keep adding and adding and adding. And so that it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's, for some of these things, a checklist is not just, you do your checklist and you're done with it. It's an open document. It's something that you continually improve upon. And improving doesn't mean you keep adding to it. Sometimes improving means to take steps away from it if they're not useful. So.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. All right, Simon, here we go. How do you check for buy-in from larger field teams or with remote operations? And I would say you probably have the most remote operations possible, going from Turnagain Pass, Alaska, down to New Mexico. So, what are your thoughts there?
My job is kind of weird in that way. It's like it's not my responsibility to like make sure that like Alex and Gabrielle are following their safety protocols on a given day. Like, that's Frank's job. My job is to try and figure out how can I support Frank and give him the tools that he needs to manage his own operation and to create basically the tools and the systems that he needs to create a foundation of his operation. And what I've learned in that process is, like, you know, to build on what these guys have said, like, you have to have systems and you have to have programming, or you cannot run these type of operations. There has to be a structure that gives people a framework and a language to communicate on, and a way to come back to Don's question, like, this stuff's iterative. You have to be able to, like, compare and contrast and look at results and decide if your systems are working or if they're just onerous and actually holding you down, you know. But without that baseline paperwork, it's impossible, unless you're in a very small team that's static and you never have new people. But what I've learned, and so to put a cap on that, like, paper doesn't make us safer by itself, but you have to have it. My job is to figure out what is that paper, like, what is that programming, and what is that system that we can push out to these people in a way that creates the groundwork, but it isn't just overwhelming. And so something that's possible, and so to get to the answer, what I've come to believe is there's two things in that process that are super important. One is that the single most important thing is that you're giving them a tool that allows the operation to critically think about the work that it's doing and the risk that it faces and the responsibilities that they have. If you can do that, then it's pretty easy to get buy-in, I think. Like if people can understand why you're doing this stuff, why you're doing the programming, generally they come along. The second piece is that relationships on the ground, like in this crew or in any other crews from the Chugach to New Hampshire to southern down to California, like I have to maintain a good enough relationship with the people that run these programs that I can call them and talk to them, and it's pretty clear pretty quickly whether or not people are like paying attention and they know about the programming that's out there and they're using it, or whether they're clearly just like doing the paperwork, throwing it in a drawer. And so I think two things, like getting people to critically think, and two, having relationships with your people that maybe you're not their best friend, but there's enough of a give and a take there that you know that they'll come to you if they need help, and two, you can kind of assess if maybe somebody's off the reservation a little bit.
That's a great answer for maybe not the best worded question. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely have followed an operation that I've worked with over the years, kind of remotely, reading their morning and evening guide meeting notes. And I think that's one way that you can kind of track whether their actions are matching their intentions or the group's intentions. So it's a tall order when you're not personally involved with being out with the teams in the field every day, or it's too large a team to see what everyone's doing. You need to come up with ways to judge that buy-in. And I guess in this 10th anniversary theme, I'll harken back to another presenter we had, Seth Carbonari, where he was talking about the efficacy and the results that they got with wildland fire, talking about task, purpose, and intent at the morning meeting, as far as going out in the field and enabling the teams to make better decisions, knowing why they were doing what they were doing. So I think that's another way of expressing what you just talked about, Simon. All right, any other thoughts from the crew there? Keep it moving? Okay. I'll throw this just up in the air, jump ball. How long do you allow new systems or protocols to gain traction? You come up with this brilliant idea, that's it. This is what's going to make people safer in the field, or enable people to be safer, empower them even. And you maybe come up with this or distribute this creative solution. Might take a while for it to gain traction, or you may have just been wrong. How long do you give it, and how do you monitor it?
You're interested in time domains. I don't have a great answer for you, Don. I'm still thinking about your question around culture change and time, which I would love to come back to you when you're done with this question.
I'll say something. I don't know if it's going to be intelligent or not, but I think it really depends on what type of change you're trying to make. Is this a small change? Is this a big change? You know, if it's a small change and you try it out and it doesn't work, you throw it away. Maybe you don't give it any time. If you're trying to make a big cultural change in the way you do things, then I think if you really believe in it, you give it as long as it takes, and you keep pushing that until the change is made. If it's really going to make people safer in their jobs, I think it's worth the push. But it's a pretty general question. I think there's definitely lots of different answers.
Yeah, I think that last statement was really good. Like, if this is something that clearly is going to make people safer, if there's just like unequivocally something needs to happen to change this operation, almost doesn't care how long it takes. You just got to do it. The problem is we end up in these spots where it's not unequivocal. It's like, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. I don't know how to answer your question with regards to safety, but I have come to believe that any like functional change, like real change operationally, is like at least like 3 seasons. Like and maybe even more, but like if you change leadership, if you change output, if you change something else, scale, like you don't understand it until you practice it for multiple seasons, I believe. You don't get to that equilibrium state.
Yeah, something I heard you and I think another speaker today talk about was the iterative process. Like you can't just put it out there and say, go forth and make it great. You have to keep looking at it and seeing if it was presented the best way, or how can you tweak it to make it better. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, is that if you really believe in something and you think it's safe, then you've got to be flexible in your approach and be open to feedback. So if I'm trying to make a change where I think this is it, but I railroad it down somebody's throat, I'm probably not going to get very much traction, right? Whereas if I'm open to their feedback and like, okay, well, let's try and create this, maybe more collaboratively and join forces a bit, you might get more buy-in. And then sure, maybe my first idea isn't the best idea, but all right, well, how can we navigate this and work it together? Again, back to the buy-in.
Yeah, I think what all these folks have built on, I'd look at the example of this community and what's happened in 20, 25 years since, I haven't been involved with the avalanche industry since 2001 when I stopped patrolling. I still backcountry ski some, but I've been out of it for a long time. And for me to come in here and watch Wren and Sydney's presentation and how powerful that was, how different that is than the culture that I was part of 25 years ago is, it's stark for me having been out of it. And so that's a long period of time. But to be talking about vulnerability and trust and showing up in a leadership role, using those words openly, that was not the culture that I grew up in, either getting developed as an instructor at Knowles or when I was patrolling. So that's an example of a 25-year time frame. When you were talking about time, Don, I was thinking about like critical factors, and for me, Wren, Sydney, respected people in the industry standing up here and talking about it is so key. And I think about working with the Breckenridge, the Breckenridge Ski Patrol specifically, but then a whole bunch of Vail Resorts patrollers, probably 2016, 17, and we were talking about these concepts: trust, vulnerability, how that builds safety in your teams, high-functioning team models that lead to the best decisions you can make are all founded on trust. And talking about that in a room of patrollers was a little bit like hearing pin drop. Like, there wasn't a lot of receptivity when we first introduced that concept. And then this guy who was well-respected in that room stood up and said, so let me see if I hear what you're saying. He said, I think you're telling me that if I go out on route with the folks that I'm mentoring and I show up a little bit differently than I'm inclined to show up, and I show a little bit of vulnerability, and I choose to talk about mistakes I've made, that I might develop trust faster with some of the newer patrollers, and that might make my team safer. He said, is that what I'm hearing you say? And I'm like, yeah, that's what you're hearing me say, but that's what the research suggests. And he said, thank you very much. I'll think about that. And he sat back down. And for him to do that in that room was the sea change. They weren't going to believe me or hear me, but to have somebody who was respected in that group ask that question aloud was awesome. And to me, those are key culture change moments where somebody who's already in the mix, who people respect, is saying, this is how it's served me, this is how it's helped my teams, is huge.
Yeah,
Awesome.
well, thank you. It's humbling. And I'm same thing. I've been in the industry 30 years, and the environment that I grew up in, like I talked about, and and now I might have lost my train of thought because I guess one of the things I did want to touch on was just the cultural change. I had a whole bunch of thoughts about what you just said, so I was just trying to pull it back together. One of the things that we've done in terms of our checklists, I'll just switch topics here a bit, but we do a fieldwork check-in, and we submit it. We've now made it into as part of our InfoX workflow process. So it used to just kind of be a clipboard, and then it would get scanned or stored somewhere, but we've made it now, it's in our InfoX system, and we can download it as a PDF, and then we can quickly email it out to, we have a provincial check-in, the Transportation Management Board. But it used to be, what did it used to be called? Field trip check-in. And field trip makes it sound like we're a bunch of kids gonna go, we're going on a field trip. But just that little subtle language, you know, and this ties in when we talk about long-term cultural change. I was a ski patroller for a long time. And, you know, when I first started, I think I was making $8 an hour. And, you know, even when I was running the ski patrol, which included all of the regular patrol, the avalanche forecasting, the dispatch, the trail crew, a private volunteer ski patrol, you know, 85 people or something, you know, my wage was still so low. And that expectation that you just do this job because you love it, well, sure, that's how we all got here. We do the job because we love it, but to be recognized as professionals and to be able to take that into worker safety and get that buy-in, that now we're talking about, we're doing field work. We're going out and we're taking observations. We might take our skis because that's the safest way to travel, but it's field work. We're not doing a field trip. So just even like little subtle language changes as well can help with not just buy-in from my team, that I want my team to make good decisions, but the people who have to be accountable to a budget to, you know, and decisions on helicopter time and everything else, that this is important work. So the buy-in has to, you know, in any organization, big or small, has to go both ways too.
Yeah, it's an amazingly painful process working through semantics and the actual wordsmithing, but it is actually really important.
I've got a quick comment on that. Just hearing you say that made me think about in 2014 we did a kind of Forest Service-wide avalanche program anyway, kind of redo and research into like what are we doing safety-wise, and we kind of rebuilt the whole program. But one of the craziest things about that whole project was getting 6-8 months into it and realizing, you know, there's a room full of 35 people and 6 or 8 of them are super pissed off and nobody's getting along and nobody can agree. And in the moment realizing the reason is because those 6 or 8 people had different definitions for what avalanche terrain is. And so if you think about talking about working by yourself, some people, when they hear the word avalanche terrain or doing avalanche work, field work by yourself, they immediately think of like the north face of the gnarliest peak you can imagine and going out there by yourself. Other people are literally thinking about like walking up a ridge and eating a peanut butter sandwich for lunch and coming back down and they can see their truck the whole time. And realizing that those semantics are so powerful and so fundamental to any type of negotiation and buy-in, that was kind of a landslide moment for me.
Turns out communication is actually important. All right, I have a few more questions, but let's open it up to the crowd here. Are there questions that you would like to ask these folks?
I have one and I'm close to the box, so I'll start. I am also curious, Al, I think you sort of mentioned this, but to cycle back to the like culture change and timeline question, I think that's really interesting to me, especially just thinking of like most of the work is on a seasonal scale. And I'm directing this at you because I'm just curious in the work you've done and kind of the research and facilitation you've done, if you have advice for folks on times like to try or to not try to initiate culture change. And I think like, you know, we both used to work for Knowles, so I have like, okay, on a semester course when you're transitioning sections, that's a great time to actually try to initiate culture change, but maybe like in the middle of like kind of a grueling week, it like doesn't land. And so just in thinking about what is often seasonal work, and like just knowing a bit of your background and the work you've done, like what would you advise people to lean into or like lean away from if they are going to try to address culture changes that they want to make happen?
And is your question specifically asking in the seasonal world? Like,
Yeah.
how would I, yeah.
Yeah, which like I think most people who work, like there's a seasonal aspect to this work.
Yeah, great. Not at the end of the season, when people are fried. I mean, there's a whole, you know this model from Knowles, the waterline model, but it's set the expectation right out of the beginning of the season about what the behaviors of the team that you're all looking for. So when I think about going into a work season and workflow, what is the collaborative understanding and desire of that group around how you all work together, what feels important to be elevated that season. If you're bringing in Wren and Sydney's work, like if you're the designated leader of that team, here's something I'm really excited for us to integrate this season. And I would do it right out of the gate in a seasonal world. Yeah, other thoughts from you all?
I would say timing is everything. You know, like if you know that your team has just gone through something or in a, you know, in a cruxy kind of time or a fatigue time or, you know, and I talk about that, again, going back to these job interviews I did last week, trying to hire new people, you know, I talk about where I'm at and it's like if you have feedback, you know, pick your time. If I'm making a critical decision about a highway, maybe don't come at me with something in that moment, but hold it, and unless it's a safety thing, unless I'm really missing something, but you know, again, back to your teams and trying to get something, again, it comes back to that buy-in, so picking your timing is crucial. But I don't have an answer to like what the best timing is. I think that's individual to each team in each setting.
Personally, I know some of the biggest failures I've had as far as worker safety and trying to improve situations is coming up with an idea, pushing it in a preseason training, and then just letting it drop and not following up. So start early, but stay at it would be my answer there. Other questions? Middle of the back row.
I have an admittedly pointed question. My question is, in all of your experience in this, I guess, I don't have to summarize, how important has it been in having a diverse group of people making the decisions about what change needs to happen, how to make that change, as a result of like effectiveness of change that happens, but then also effectiveness of actually making the workplace safer?
Sorry, I thought that was directed at everyone. Was that directed specifically at me?
No, everyone.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Wren. 100% diverse. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is if the sort of the core of the question is a diverse audience an important part of making sure that's a good decision? 100%. And I think the people on the ground doing the work, out on the hill making the decisions, voices are imperative, and they're not always included. So if that's the core of your question, it's 100% important, both for good decision making and then the follow through and people actually then living into those changes when they're out doing the work.
Since it's for all of us, I'll add kind of my thoughts on it. But yeah, diversity is huge. For me, I look at people that come into our program, people who, some of our plow drivers, and try to incorporate all of their experiences. Like as we live our lives, we all have different experience. And whether you're a 19-year-old kid or you 60-year-old guy that's been doing it forever, like you can always learn more from other people's experiences. And having that diversity and different viewpoints is huge.
Who had the question? Someone, there was a question down, Brendan.
So Don mentioned the term when he started the panel. And I'm just curious because some of our best systems have come from it, and it is a question for everybody, is why isn't the Wild West culture or mindset a good system?
Because we're human.
Simon's from Lander. Maybe he's the best person to answer that.
I'm not sure what you mean by Wild West system. I mean, mindset.
Well, I mean, you know, we have a lot of people in this room who, when they started in this industry, right, we have all different facets, and, you know, we're going to use that word just because we're all snow dorks. And they came up in the Wild West mindset of like, okay, we're going to go out and figure these routes out on our own. We're going to do it how we want to do it. And that has created a lot of the systems that we now use. Yet for a lot of people in this room that are of a quote unquote younger generation, we're being told that mindset or culture is bad oftentimes. And I think there are positives to it personally. And so that's why I ask each panelist, why do you think it is bad?
I think I see what you're saying, yeah. I think I'm going to struggle a little bit with what I'm actually want to say, but I think we really need to be able to differentiate our systems from like a planning and culture and mindset perspective from our actions in the moment when we're faced with something that is like fast, you know? And so there's ways that we can, so to get to part of your question, yeah, it's really fun to go in and figure things out by yourself. And it's really fun to take a piece of terrain nobody's ever gone into and somebody gives you some explosives and you get to go figure it out, right? But all the people that did that work, they not only learned a ton, but that's the point. They learned a ton and we should be able to learn from them. And so hopefully what's happening is that the people that have been through it and have learned can help us set up guardrails upon which we can create these operations and we can do this work and we can lessen the chance or the probability that one of us gets hurt or killed. Yet at the same time, I don't think we should be creating rules that in the moment somebody has to, this is hyperbole, but like we shouldn't be pulling checklists out in the moment and wondering where we're at on our checklist. It's too late. That's when training matters, it's when competency matters, it's when intuition matters, you know? And so I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, but I think that separating those things is really important. And something else I would say, I was thinking a minute ago, you know, this whole panel, we've kind of been talking about systems in ways. But at the end of the day, it's you guys that keep yourself safe and the people next to you safe. It's those decisions you make moment to moment to moment. Whether there's a rule for it or not, it's just good decision making. It's just situational awareness. It's just understanding what your responsibilities and your scope are. You know, anybody else do better than that?
Well, no, that was awesome. And I was just talking with somebody the other day about guardrails and the importance of that, and that's what it is. And I think what comes up for me when I think cowboy, you know, I think it's a label and it's a stereotype. So you could say what we did when we went into Camano was pretty cowboy. Like we had no idea what, you know, we had no history, or very little history, and we had to go in and we had to figure it out. And we had to create a hazard scale, and we had to create communication tools, and we had to come up with all of our systems. But we used a lot of structure in doing that. But then when I think of like cowboy and going out there, I think of, you know, maybe certifications or structure in a system, or, you know, do you have some protocols, or is it like, you just kind of your risk tolerance. It makes me think of risk tolerance as well. Like, what is your operational or your personal risk tolerance? So those are all just kind of maybe thoughts to throw onto your word cloud there. But cowboy maybe, has maybe got a bit of a bad rap in terms of a stereotype of how you might approach a problem or a hazardous situation. But I really like what you're saying about the difference between individual or kind of small team and planning. There's a difference there.
All right, I see the hook coming up. I do want to encourage you for the whole day, as Lynn said, but particularly for this session, think about how you can take this home. Take it to your operation. What direction can you improve worker safety? Because it's not a static thing, and it takes effort, it takes discipline, and it takes collaboration. So thank you so much to everyone up here. That was, I thought it was a great hour. I learned a bunch, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.